The eyes of Texas are upon us.
Tonight, the eyes of Texas are on Governor Greg Abbott as he answers your questions during a live town hall event in East Texas. Questions about your safety.
We want to ensure that Texas is going to be as safe as possible for everybody in this state. And it means we're going to have to do more.
Questions about Texas schools.
Future generations of children in Texas will be better off because of the education reforms passed this session.
Your taxes.
The tax burden on Texas property owners will be less.
And security along the Texas-Mexico border.
Increasing border protection and security for our communities.
Tonight, we examine the results in Texas under the governor's leadership, and we'll look ahead to what comes next.
From moments of triumph to horrors of tragedy. Generation after generation, Texans have been tested, and Texans have always prevailed.
Hello, and thank you for joining us for a special live edition of State of Texas. I'm Josh Hinkle. Each week, we bring you an in-depth look at Texas politics. You can see our program broadcast each Sunday on your local Nexstar station. Tonight, we're looking ahead to a town hall with Texas Governor Greg Abbott. We'll bring it to you live from Tyler starting at 7 o'clock. Sally Hernandez is there now.
Good evening from Tyler, Texas, here at the Cowan Center, the University of Texas at Tyler. This is where we're going to have the conversation with Governor Greg Abbott, who should arrive anytime very soon to start off our town hall, something that he's never done before. So this is really a way for you to get to hear from the governor directly about issues that matter to so many of us when it comes to education, when it comes to immigration, and of course, we're talking about safety, especially after what happened in El Paso, the mass shooting there that killed nearly 24 people, asking the governor, what does he plan to do to keep you safe? A lot of questions, parents, I'm sure we have with schools starting when it comes to the Texas Education Agency giving out grades to those schools. I'm going to ask the governor, what does this mean for schools in Austin and in Central Texas? What does this mean for schools who are not making the grade? How are we going to make sure that students are successful? So we hope you join us for his answers. And of course, we hope you watch our post-show live from Austin. And we'll see you back here whenever we're done with the governor for his first town hall live in Tyler.
Thank you, Sally. The governor will answer questions on several issues at tonight's town hall. One big topic will be the deadly mass shooting in El Paso. It has both citizens and lawmakers calling for the governor to take action. He met with El Paso area lawmakers a few days after the shooting. Then he spoke about what needs to happen next to prevent future tragedies.
We need to look on broader-based issues as a state and as a people to reduce racism and hate in this state, to tamp down the rhetoric, to promote more unity. We need to also ensure that guns are not in the hands of deranged killers like the man who committed this heinous crime here in El Paso, while also at the same time ensuring that constitutional rights are not going to be violated. The bottom line is that there's much to be done, and there's a need for speed.
The governor directed the Department of Public Safety to form a task force to help develop strategies to protect against acts of domestic terrorism. He also announced plans for a series of roundtable discussions on gun violence, similar to what happened after the Santa Fe school shootings. Those discussions led to new laws in the past legislative session. Politics reporter Phil Prazen walks us through the solutions state lawmakers are now tapping to save our students.
It was emotional.
Here he is, Officer Bandit, Maestro.
Serious.
Nobody's shooting just Democrats, nobody's shooting just Republicans.
And different than what usually comes after a school shooting.
If it happens in a tiny little sleepy town of Santa Fe, Texas, it could happen anywhere, and it happened today.
If you're just joining us, there's been a shooting at a school in Santa Fe, Texas. It's outside of Galveston.
10 people were killed and another 10 were hurt.
It's just like surreal, kind of. It's just like the unimaginable, and it happened.
In the days after the Santa Fe High School shooting, Governor Abbott called school, government, and law enforcement leaders here to the Capitol. A small but important detail showed the meetings would be inclusive. Gun control advocates were also invited.
I think there was an acknowledgement around the table that, yeah, that is an issue.
The roundtables led Governor Abbott to lay out 40 recommendations the next week.
This plan is a starting point, not an ending place.
A series of options, including gun safety campaigns, communications and security upgrades, and more training.
I'm not taking any strategies off the table. I have been and will continue to work with legislators to build consensus on proposals.
Some ideas could happen immediately. Others had to wait until lawmakers returned in January for the 86th legislative session. Then, Santa Fe area Senator Larry Taylor spearheaded the effort on school security.
I wake up every morning and think about the parents. As a father of 3, a grandfather of 2. We have to stop this.
A booming economy meant Texas had more money than expected to spend on security measures, redesigns, equipment, and training. Days of hearings and votes moved Senate Bill 11 along the process.
When you have that, when you go to multiple young people's funerals back to back within a few short days, it's very difficult, and you don't want to do that again. That's why we have to get this done.
The bill passed 30-1 in the Senate and 137-8 in the House.
Senate Bill 11, making schools safer, is now law in the state of Texas.
Governor Abbott signed Senate Bill 11 into law June 6th, and it took effect immediately. Senate Bill 11 has more than $100 million in security improvements. Now, each district will get nearly $10 per student to pay for new structures, security guards, training, and equipment. It also gives the Texas Student Safety Center at Texas State University in San Marcos a lot of authority. They'll hire 25 more staff members to audit Texas school districts on a lengthy list of new requirements about how to protect against and practice for an active shooter. If districts are not in compliance 6 months after an audit, the Texas Education Agency could appoint a conservator over the district. Still no changes after that, the state agency can appoint a board of managers to run the security for the school. And finally, each district must create threat assessment teams and school safety committees to advise the school district. Phil Prazen for State of Texas.
Online now, explore our digital project, Save Our Students, Solutions for Wellness and Safety. See why we're taking a closer look at this important topic. Stories from across the nation, in-depth conversations with school workers on the front line, interactive analysis of what's happening with mental health and your children, plus community outreach and resources to get help for your family. It's all online now at SaveOurStudentsTX.com. For perspective on the Governor's Town Hall, we bring in our panel. We have Sherry Greenberg, a former Democratic State Representative from Austin. She's now a professor at the LBJ School of Public Affairs at the University of Texas. Larry Gonzalez, he's a Republican from Round Rock who served 4 terms in the Texas House where he chaired the Sunset Advisory Commission. He now works as a consultant. And over here we have Matthew Watkins. He's the politics editor for the Texas Tribune. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you very much for having me. Happy to be here.
Well, you saw, the governor putting that playbook out there, which is really something that many people are expecting he's going to tap now that we're trying to respond to the El Paso shootings. Can you talk about how critical a night like tonight is to explain that vision, Sherry?
It is important, and we've already seen yesterday when he was coming out with the new task force on domestic terrorism, echoing what he did in the wake of Santa Fe and that school shooting. So he understands that he needs to be proactive, and he needs to have a plan, and he needs to get out ahead of this.
Now, you had just left the session before this, so you had been on the sidelines now to see how things were going from afar. How do you think that this last session was? Was it effective for the governor?
It was extremely effective. I think it was all the work that went into preparation for the session. It is the round table. To me, it's listening. It's easy to hold a round table, and if too many people are talking, not much gets done, but they were listening, and they came together with an agenda item, And they got so much of that done. So I think the critical part is being able to listen to your constituents, being able to realize what can get done, because there's always politics and how those votes go out, and then tackle what you can and do the best you can. But you have to be in a spirit of listening and learning, which I think everybody is.
We've heard so many calls for action after the shooting in El Paso. What specifically when it comes to guns, because that's a big part of the conversation, what's the challenge for lawmakers right now?
Well, there's two challenges. One is that there's a very big divide among lawmakers on what should be done. I mean, for some people, the answer is that people need more guns to protect themselves. And for other people, the answer is we need to get guns out of people's hands, especially dangerous people's hands. You know, I think one thing a lot of people turned to were the red flag laws. This was an issue that was brought up by Governor Abbott after the last shooting, and then he kind of quickly backed away from it. It's the idea of giving judges the authority to take guns away from people that are deemed dangerous. Since the El Paso shooting, we've heard from President Trump about this. We've heard from Senator John Cornyn about this. But it still remains an open question whether this is something that leaders in the legislature would be open to.
You know, the governor called this an act of terrorism committed by a white supremacist. Do you see that affecting how the governor and lawmakers are going to be responding?
Well, I do see that as affecting it. When you call something an act of domestic terrorism, that means that you need to have a proactive plan regarding terrorism. Some of that could relate to the red flag law. There was polling done just last spring here in Texas that showed that there is a lot of support, even back last spring in Texas, among those who were polled for red flag laws. So you can look at red flag laws, but you also, with this task force and with this listening, have to understand that there are hateful people, as he said, and that this is actually domestic terrorism, and you cannot shy away from that. You have to look at what types of alerts, what types of enforcement you need for domestic terrorism.
Now, you mentioned polling, so I want to come back to you guys in just a minute,
Sure.
but I have to head over here because we have our polling expert. We want to take a deeper dive into the topic of guns and gun safety in Texas. In particular, we want to get insight into what Texans think, so we're bringing in Joshua Blank. He's the research director of the Texas Politics Project at the University of Texas. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
You've done some polling on attitudes surrounding guns. Does gun violence really rank high with Texans when it comes to everything the governor is going to be talking about?
Not really. I mean, the thing is that, you know, there are issues that are perpetually at the top of the list for Texans, things like immigration and border security, healthcare, education. I would say guns and gun control and gun violence really comes in kind of in the second tier of issues. And so consistently across our polling, and even in the wake of sort of mass shootings, when we ask what's the most important problem facing the country, what's the most important problem facing Texas, only about 5% of Texans would say it's gun control or gun violence. There are just other issues that rise to the top before gun violence.
You know, we've had mass shootings before. How do you think the recent shooting in El Paso will affect that?
Well, I think under normal circumstances, we would say probably not much, right? I mean, we've had mass shootings before. We've had mass shootings in Texas, even recently. I think what might make this different is the fact that it's not just another mass shooting. It's an act of domestic terrorism. It's you know, an act where the target is a specific racial group in a state where that group makes up an increasing proportion of the state. So, you know, in terms of Abbott addressing this, it's part of, you know, I think in talking about white supremacists and the motivation for these things is really important because there's a large population in the state that's not really politically active, and Hispanics. And an issue, you know, when you have an event like this, the question is, does this become mobilizing? Does this change edges? Is this where we see something different happen? And that's why I think you're going to see the governor and a lot of people playing this very carefully.
Where do Democrats and Republicans fall on the gun debate issue right now?
Well, there's two ways to answer that question, right? I mean, one is where do they fall on the gun debate, and the other is where do they fall in terms of how do we deal with mass shootings? And I think one of the things, so for the key here is that there are different questions, right? So in general, Republicans are a little bit reflexively resistant to new gun control laws. When we asked at the beginning of the legislative session whether gun control laws should be made more strict or less strict, about 49% of Texans said that it should be made more strict, but that included 80% of Democrats. But at the same time, about 80% of Republicans said we should either leave them alone or make them less strict, right? But when we ask about the causes of mass shootings, whether in schools or in general, what you find is a pretty big divergence of opinion about what is the problem that's leading to this. So where Democrats are much more likely to say it's lax gun control laws, Republicans writ large are just much more likely to say it's mental health, it's bad parenting, it's basically people being irresponsible with their weapons, and it's an individual problem or a problem of mental health, which is why often when we have these mass shootings, there's all this discussion, especially from Republican elected officials, around the issue of mass health or mental health, because that's an attitude that their voters generally agree with.
School safety was a marquee issue of the legislative session, but it was just one of the issues on Governor Abbott's priority list. Our Wes Rappaport takes a closer look at the governor's influence among the legislature.
I am proud to tell you that the state of Texas has never been better.
Governor Greg Abbott used his State of the State address to outline his emergency items, a half-dozen commitments for lawmakers to tackle during the 140-day sprint. Teacher pay, school finance reform, and property tax reform getting top billing, alongside school safety, student mental health, and disaster relief.
It is our time to chart a course that will make Texas even better. Not for just the next 4 years, but for the next 40 years.
By and large, state leaders did it. They injected $6.5 billion into the state's education system and devoted $5.1 billion to lower property taxes.
Getting those resources where they're needed, creating equity across the state, doing a lot of transformational school finance reform that should really help incentivize and help our best teachers be rewarded for that. I think in the long run that's going to be a home run.
Republican State Senator Don Buckingham said Abbott's leadership showed itself in the property tax discussion.
What are some of those tools that he uses to have that effectiveness that you talked about this session?
Well, he had that negotiating trick. I think last session we ended up somewhere around 6% or something, 4%. I forget exactly where it ended at the end of the day, and so he came in this session and said 2.5. So he started out from not where most people thought he was going to, and we took it from there and got as tight a package as we could get.
It didn't feel like we had the heavy hand of another chamber or the governor micromanaging our work.
But Central Texas State Representative Aaron Zwiener, a Democrat, says despite the state's top 3 leaders bringing both parties and both chambers together at times, she points to missed opportunities to focus on health care.
We did have the conversation about Medicaid expansion this session. We didn't have it very successfully, unfortunately.
Listen, the fact is that we have accomplished so much. But you all know as well as I do that more must be done if we are going to fulfill the promise of Texas.
All right, Wes Rappaport joins us now live from UT Tyler. That's where tonight's town hall with the governor will be in just a bit. What's the atmosphere like there, Wes?
Hi, Josh. Well, just in the last 15 seconds or so, the governor has taken the stage and everyone stood up and applauded. And then we will take a step out here and show you what the situation is here. We have the president of UT Tyler is here, along with some of the hosts, the moderators of this town hall discussion. And then, of course, Governor Abbott is here as well. This will be, as we have been talking about today, an opportunity to talk about gun legislation, whether that's something that we will see happen here. This will also be an opportunity for the governor to tout some of his property tax and education wins, so to speak, for this legislative session. We have also seen come in here to the auditorium State Senator Brian Hughes, State Representatives Cole Hefner and Matt Schaefer. So they are looking, of course, for opportunities to tout the successes of the session. Surely opportunities will come here to talk about immigration. Possibly, if there is time, we may hear about some of the drama that has unfolded in the Capitol over the last several days regarding Speaker Bonin. We may have also hear opportunities to talk about just a wide range of issues. This is an hour of kind of no holding back, and we'll hear what the governor has to say tonight.
All right, Wes, thank you very much. Governor Abbott wielded his influence even after lawmakers finished their work. He vetoed 58 bills this session. That's about 4% of the total number of bills passed by the House and the Senate. After the 2018 election and the 2019 legislative session, Governor Abbott grabbed full control of the steering wheel for the Republican Party in Texas. His influence is boosted by a massive campaign fundraising account and scores of volunteers. Politics reporter Phil Prazen shows us why Abbott is the dominant player in Texas politics today.
Governor Greg Abbott has had to adjust to a changing Texas. And according to the 2018 election, he's done it better than other Republicans. He defeated his Democratic opponent by 13 points. Senator Ted Cruz squeaked into his second term by less than 3. Texas Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick and Attorney General Ken Paxton, other statewide Republicans, won by less than 5 points. One key difference: Abbott tends to avoid the cultural and partisan battles waged by other top Republicans.
The bathroom bill, if it comes to your desk, is not one of those priorities that I heard you mention.
It's not on my agenda.
Abbott has been reliably conservative, but he picks the right battles for the state. He has not gotten sidetracked in some of the more controversial social and other issues that have been very divisive.
Longtime political advisor Ray Sullivan tells me Abbott and his team are the backbone of the Republican Party in the state. Abbott's campaign can hire more than 125 full-time field staff and runs a digital app that other Republicans can use. Not to mention, he's the most prolific fundraiser in state history, raising $26 million, more than 3 years out from re-election.
Every Republican up and down the ballot really relies on him to put the campaign organization in place for the whole party.
While Abbott is not running for re-election this time, the entire Texas House is. The state hasn't had divided government in nearly 20 years. If Abbott wants to have more friends than foes in the House, he'll have to use his vast campaign arsenal to prop up Republican candidates in 2020. Phil Prazen for State of Texas.
We're back with Joshua Blank from the Texas Politics Project. You've done some statewide polling. How do Texans feel about the governor compared to other Texas leaders or other Texas lawmakers?
I mean, comparatively speaking, the governor's in an extremely strong position. I mean, in a polarized environment that we live in, where Republicans almost universally give a positive approval of Republican elected officials and Democrats will almost universally give a negative evaluation, Abbott kind of stands apart to some degree from other Texas Republican, especially statewide leaders, in the sense that his approval among Democrats is higher than it is among any other statewide leader, and his disapproval is lower. And he's it sounds a little crass, but in a lot of ways he's benefited from being the person who responds to these tragedies, whether it be Hurricane Harvey or a mass shooting, and being able to be the one who comes across in a nonpartisan way in a state that oftentimes feels extremely partisan.
Beyond those tragedies to respond to, we often hear about property taxes and school finance reform. That has been a big issue at the Capitol, but is it something that really Texans are concerned with?
To some extent, yes. I mean, I know that we hear from Republican elected officials all the time that the number one issue that they hear about is property taxes. But going into the session, when we tested to see among the governor's 6 emergency items which Texas voters think should be the main priority of the legislature, property taxes was about 23%, but the education-related items ended up being about 47% when combined. And while it's a bigger issue for Republicans, about a third of whom said we should be focusing on property taxes, for Democrats, almost a majority said we should focus on education. So it's a little bit uneven.
What is the most important issue right now for Texans?
It is what it has been for a number of years now, which is immigration and border security. And that's driven overwhelmingly by Republican voters. For Democrats, the issues are more in the range of healthcare, education, and increasingly political corruption and leadership. But for Republicans, a majority will say that the number one issue facing the state is either immigration or border security, and that is consistent across time and space.
Yeah, so is it different for that top priority for Democrats and then for Republicans?
Right, that's right. So for Republicans, the top priority is the border. Right, and for Democrats, that top priority has historically been education or healthcare, but increasingly, if Donald Trump is the president, it's more turning towards political leadership.
Speaking of political leadership, one question the governor could face tonight is how he's going to respond to the scandal surrounding Texas House Speaker Dennis Bonnen. On Monday, the House General Investigating Committee asked the Texas Rangers to investigate. It all started after Bonnen met with Michael Quinn Sullivan, the leader of the conservative activist group Empower Texans. Sullivan says he has an audio recording of Bonnen asking Empower Texans to campaign against 10 Republicans. In exchange, Bonnen would grant sorry, lost my place. Yeah, there we go. He would grant him media credentials to that group, giving them access to lawmakers on the floor. The Rangers will look into whether any laws were broken. We're back with our roundtable now. How do you think the governor's going to respond to that, Larry?
You let the process work. I think the General Investigating Committee did their job, and you let the DPS do their job, and you see how it all plays out. The truth is, very few people have actually heard the tape. I mean, don't know what's on it, what's not on it. You have some reporting coming out, but I think it's safe. Deep breath, let it play out. Let's see what it is. I think the members are doing the right thing by just slow and easy and let the process work.
Does this issue even affect the governor?
I would not say in a significant way. You know, this is the rare political scandal where the public opinion is far less important than the opinion of the 149 other members of the Texas House, the people who actually elect Dennis Bonnen to be Speaker. You know, I think Governor Abbott, you know, in one way he's got to wait and see what comes out. We don't even know all the facts. That's a way for him to kind of say, there's nothing for me to say here right now. And the other thing is that this is not really his fight.
How is the governor different, though, from other state and federal lawmakers?
Well, this really is, as was alluded to, inside baseball, and I would be shocked if the governor waded into it, because the governor is elected statewide, and he is not part of the legislative body. You know, we have the bicameral legislative body with the members of the House and the members of the Senate, and the Speaker, let's not forget, is elected from a district just like other members of the House, and then they vote for him as Speaker, as opposed to the Lieutenant Governor, who runs statewide just as the governor does, and then is Lieutenant Governor and presides over the Senate.
Were there any bills that surprised you that he vetoed this session?
Gosh, I don't know. I think everything from a priority standpoint, right? The governor gets to have the state of the state, he gets to set the agenda, the members work, and then he signs it and he takes credit for it. And he's in a very wonderful position to be able to do all of that. On the veto side, I don't know that there's anything that jumped up and caught me. Usually you can kind of tell what passed, but might have some issues when it gets to the governor's desk. So I'm not sure that anything really jumped up and bit any member specifically that we were surprised by.
What do you think there are still some questions out there that Texans may have that didn't get answered or addressed in the legislative session that the governor will have a chance to actually do tonight?
Well, actually, you know, one of the things is the legislative session ends in May, and a lot of the laws don't go into effect until September. So he still is kind of in a position where he wants to explain the accomplishments that they had. You know, some of these bills also, property taxes, school finance, these are going to be felt over a long period of time. You know, one of the things I think as a politician, you don't want them to forget about the things that you did. So I would expect him to be, you know, pushing those accomplishments to the voters, really trying to explain to them, these are the big issues that we got things done for in the last session.
Go ahead.
And several of those were on his list of emergency items, his top priorities. So the property tax revenue cap, you know, putting a different break instead of 8%, the lower break for having to go to the voters to collect more revenue. That is something that was a very high priority for him and for members, and had been really for about 20 years. This is not something that just came up as an issue. But it won't go into effect this budget cycle, but the following. So it is something that will have a delay in implementation.
Anything that you think the governor will want to not answer tonight?
I don't think so. I think when you're in that position and you walk into a town hall, you absolutely take on the questions. That's the format, right? That's the beauty of it. I think it's an opportunity to take credit for all the triumphs. It is a little tough, given the timing of this, with calling, you know, with the domestic terrorism, with white supremacists. Those are some really strong words. And so there will be some tough questions there. There's no doubt about it. But I think he is very thoughtful. I think he's worked his way through this. He's always done a very good job kind of addressing these things. So I anticipate that he will fully answer everything that is asked of him and have a plan for those things.
And it's certainly something because he's not up for re-election for a while.
Right, right. But there could be some difficult questions. He will have to respond to them. He's not in a situation where he can sit back, think about it overnight, craft a response, and have a press release. That's not the situation he's in tonight.
All right, well, we are just moments away from that live town hall with Governor Abbott. Here is a live look inside the Cowan Center at the University of Texas at Tyler, where tonight's event will be held. Thank you for joining us for this special edition of State of Texas. We'll be back with you at 8 o'clock with an in-depth perspective on the town hall with Governor Abbott.